Welcome to my video presentation on genders and sexuality, where we will be questioning socially constructed masculinity and its impact on the modern world. In today's discussion, we will be answering three questions. How have different types of masculinity affected men in both the millennial and Gen Z generations? How has the stereotypical understanding of ideal manhood and hegemonic masculinity created an unequal power dynamic between males and females? And how does binary thinking feed into and normalize toxic masculinity? We'll start with question one. How have different types of masculinity affected men in both the millennial and Gen Z generations? To begin with, some vital definitions to answer this question. Hegemonic masculinity is characterized by an unequal power dynamic between men and women, in which rich white men are above lower class men and women. Hegemonic masculinity can be seen in the song I'll Make a Man Out of You in Mulan. Subordinate masculinity is essentially the opposite of this last concept, examples being gay men, though there are often cultural consequences, such as gay men being the victims of hate crime. Complicit masculinity is where there are men who do not enact the hegemonic masculinity practices, but benefit from the inherent power associated. Marginalized masculinity is where those who embody hegemonic masculinity are marginalized due to physical stature, class, ability, or race. These people often feel forgotten and neglected. The term millennial is used to describe a person born between 1981 and 1996. And according to Eldridge, a person from Gen Z is born between 1997 and 2012. Influencer is a colloquial term for the prominent male influencer, such as Andrew Tate. The term misogynist is a word used to describe a hatred or prejudice against women. Rich asked the question, are millennial men too masculine? To which he said that most millennial men cobble their own unique definition of masculinity. Through his study, he also determined that many men feel that classic masculinity is a facade protecting toxic masculinity. Another article by Tom Reed suggested that masculinity has had a negative impact on millennials, leading them to not know what a real man is, showing that hegemonic masculinity has had a negative effect on males. This has led to men questioning stereotypes of how men should be strong, stoic, and macho, as this is a difficult ideal to shake as it has been perpetuated over many generations. For the Gen Z men, masculinity plays an entirely different role. The idea of influences have begun to shape men and what their ideas of a man is. In the age of social media, young men are grappling with manhood and masculinity, and the internet can drive both positive connections and dangerous ideas. The majority of young men find the internet to be a place of complexities and tension, and navigating this space can be difficult with the surge of pressure on platforms such as X, Instagram, Facebook, and Snapchat to be the ideal man. Influencer Andrew Tate has taken the world by storm and has become a role model to many young men. According to Booth, British American former kickboxer Andrew Tate has 8.7 million followers on X and is currently facing criminal charges, which he denies, of human trafficking, rape, and forming a criminal gang to sexually exploit women. He has previously admitted to being a misogynist and is proud of this. 1 in 4 UK males ages 16 to 29 believe it is harder to be a man than a woman, and a fifth of those who have heard of Andrew Tate look favourably towards him. With the rise of men like Tate becoming an idol for the young men of the world, how can it be expected that there will be a decline in abuse against women and unequal power dynamics? How can it be expected that men will be vulnerable and honest when they're being taught to be loud in order to be heard and valued? The second question we'll be answering today is how a stereotypical understanding of ideal manhood and hegemonic masculinity has created an unequal power dynamic between males and females. Raywin Connell's concept of hegemonic masculinity serves as an analytical instrument to identify these attitudes and practices among men that perpetuate gender inequality involving both domination over women and the power of some men over other, often minority groups of men. Ideal manhood and hegemonic masculinity feed into the unequal power dynamic between males and females, as it perpetuates the idea that men need to be dominating in order for them to be a real man. This then creates an environment where hegemonic masculinity runs rampant and puts men on a pedestal where they are untouched. Although the idea of hegemonic masculinity is not only a prominent idea for men, but for women also. As women, as women expect to be pampered, to receive attention and be with a strong masculine man, though once this idea is put into practice, they don't like the strong power dynamics that have been created. A study conducted by Gaman, McCaff, Hommel, and Jacob showed that females are more likely to shove and verbally demean or threaten a male, whilst males are more likely to use knives, hits, and other weapons in abusive relationships. This study shows that there is an unequal power dynamic between males and females, and this is represented within abusive relationships and the type of abuse. Please refer to the statistics on the screen for more information, and if required, pause this video. Finally, we will answer the third question. How does binary thinking feed into and normalize toxic masculinity? To define two key terms needed to answer this question, the Oxford Review defines binary thinking as the tendency or bias to think of things in black and white without considering other options or middle ground, essentially to think traditionally and not consider modern views. Toxic masculinity is often characterized as offensive and harmful beliefs and tendencies rooted in traditional male roles, but taken to the extreme. The idea of manliness perpetuating homophobia and aggression. Binary thinking consists of traditional views and manliness, where hegemonic masculinity runs rampant. Essentially, binary thinking is the main cause of toxic masculinity, as it allows for no gray areas or differences. This idea of toxic masculinity has long been prevalent in society. However, it has only been named in recent years. Feminists have adopted toxic masculinity as a shorthand for considering homophobic and misogynist speech and violence by men, says Harrington, before going on to say that the phrase toxic masculinity became popularized in discussions about US President Donald Trump and the hashtag #MeToo movement to describe the poor behavior of white elite men. Further on this, white elite men are often the people who are exhibiting this trait of toxic masculinity. Harrington also said that feminist scholars use the term toxic masculinity as it became popularized. Essentially, it has become a colloquial term to explain the misogynist and elitist behaviors of individuals. Research shows that men who participate in organized sport show more aggressive behaviors than both athletic and non-athletic men who do not participate in organized sport. This demonstrates a culture of violence within organized sports, such as football, soccer, basketball, and more. These cultures often result in violent outbursts, often against partners. NFL player Ray Rice has been involved in a domestic abuse scandal involving his wife, as are many organized sport players across the country. This shows that men harbor aggression when not released in a meaningful and non-physical way that can lead to a buildup of emotions and result in violent outbursts. So today we answered 3 questions. How have different types of masculinity, hegemonic, subordinate, complicit, and marginalized, affected men in both millennial and Gen Z generations? How has a stereotypical understanding of ideal manhood and hegemonic masculinity created an unequal power dynamic between males and females? And how does binary thinking feed into and normalize toxic masculinity? Hopefully, this has sparked your interest in the discussion around toxic masculinity, the different types of masculinity, and how it impacts our everyday world. I encourage those watching to question your life and how you see these realities playing out in your everyday life. Thank you for your time. Hope you have a good day.